I thought, if one more of them lifts a portrait, I am going to walk into the lake. And the woman filling my water cup said, quite pleasantly, "It's very cold this time of year, your grace." The cup did not shake in my hand, because I have been a king for 6 years and a wolf for all of my life, and I do not let cups shake. But everything under my ribs went sideways. She set the jug down. She stepped back. She folded her hands into her apron the way the kitchen women are taught to, and she waited to be dismissed, and she did not look at me again. Around the long slate table, 11 of my counselors sat in perfect silence. It was the 4th day of the long quiet. No word may be spoken in the king's hall from the first bell of the quiet right to the 11th. We govern by hand sign and chalk, as Ashenmere has governed every spring for 211 years, since a word overheard through a birch wall cost a king his brother, his pack, and his throat. Not one of them had heard her, because not one of them had been listening for a voice. A serving woman speaks in the quiet, no more than a chair does. Councillor Halrick tapped the slate. He wrote in his tidy hand, "The Lady Marin of the Westwater, 24. Her father brings 400 spears." He turned the portrait toward me. I did not look at the portrait. I looked at the door, which was closing behind a small woman in a gray apron with flour on one wrist. "She heard you," said my wolf, delighted. "I know. She heard you and she answered you, and you sat there like a stunned pheasant." "I know. I like her enormously," said Bramble, and stretched, and yawned, and went asleep in the back of my skull like an animal with nothing on its conscience at all. Here is the thing about my wolf, and I have told no one, and I would have gone into the ground with it. He talks. Not the way a wolf speaks, the pull, the push, the wanting. Not the ancient thing my father described, the great silent will behind the ribs that turns a man into a spear when the pack is threatened. Mine does that too. Mine can do that. When the raiders came up through the birch in my 3rd year, my wolf rose in me like a black tide, and I do not remember the next quarter hour, and the men who came back with me would not speak of it. But the rest of the time he chats. He has opinions about plums. He mocks my posture. He counts things, steps, ravens, the number of times Halrick clears his throat before he lies. When I was 17 and had just learned my father was dying, my wolf lay down across the inside of my chest and told me the names of every hound we had ever owned, one after another all night, until the sun came up. That was the kindest thing anyone did for me that year. He calls himself Bramble. He named himself. I have never known what to do with a wolf that names himself. A king's wolf is meant to be a weapon. It is meant to be a silence with teeth in it. In Ashenmere, in the long quiet, in a hall where the highest form of honor is to say nothing at all, I sit at the head of the table with a beast in me who spends the whole council session telling me that Councillor Ostrith's beard looks like a badger that lost a fight. So I have kept him hidden. 9 years since he first spoke a full sentence to me, 9 years of a straight face. And a kitchen maid had just answered him. Not me. That is the part I understood in the corridor afterward, walking too fast, with 2 of the unheard drifting behind me like smoke, my wardens, sworn to soundlessness, who move so quietly that men have died with a warden's hand on their shoulder and never turned around. She had not answered my thought. My thought had been a thought. She had answered the laugh Bramble gave after it. She had heard him laugh, and she had heard the joke, and she had told him the lake was cold. She had not even done it as a courtesy to me. She had done it the way you answer someone you know. Bramble. Well, how long? He did not pretend. That is his one virtue. 9 years, said my wolf, comfortably. Since the winter of the burnt granary, when you were 20 and she was a girl of 19 who cried in the hearthroom where nobody goes. The corridor tilted a little. You have been speaking to a woman in my house for 9 years. You never asked. It did not occur to me to ask. Well, said Bramble, there it is. The hollow kitchens sit under the west wing, cut back into the hill, and they are the only warm place in Ashenmere in the spring. Steam on stone, the great hearth with its iron dogs, bred in ranks, 12 women and 4 men who have all worked there since before I could hold a sword, and who stopped dead and dropped into bows when their king came down the stair in a black coat with 2 silent wardens behind him, in the 4th day of the quiet, when he was permitted no words at all. I signed at them, out. They went. She did not. She was at the long table with her sleeves pushed to the elbow, cutting the eyes out of a bowl of potatoes, and she watched her kitchen empty around her without any change in her face at all. She was perhaps my age. Brown hair pinned badly, a scar across the back of one hand, old, thin, the shape of a burn. There was nothing in her face that a man would write a song about, and I want to be honest, because everything after this depends on it. She was not the loveliest woman in my hall. She was not even the loveliest woman in the room she had just been left alone in. She was the only person in Ashenmere who was not afraid of me, and I did not know yet how starved I was for that. I signed at the warden's, the door. It shut. I took the chalk from my coat, and the small slate I carry in the quiet, and I wrote, and my hand was not perfectly steady. You heard me. She read it, she set down the knife. I heard him, she said. Your Grace, I have always heard him. Him I wrote. Bramble, she said, and she said it the way you say the name of a friend's dog, fondly, with slight exasperation. He said I ate plums, Bramble offered brightly. I closed my eyes. He said I wrote, and my chalk broke, and I took another. What does he say? Ah, said Yonaqua. She wiped her hands on her apron. She leaned against the table, and she looked at me for a long moment with an expression I have spent years since trying to name, and the nearest I have come is this. It was the look of a woman deciding whether the kindest thing is to lie. She did not lie. That is one of the 4 or 5 reasons I would have burned Ashenmere to the waterline for her later, when I understood what she was. He says, she said, that you hate plums but you eat them at the spring table because your father liked them and Howrick watches you do it. He says you practice your judgments out loud, in the mirror, in the small room off the armory, until they sound less frightened. He says you wept at the lambing 3 years ago when the black ewe died, and you told the shepherd it was smoke. She counted them off on her fingers without cruelty, which was somehow worse. He says you sleep with the shutters open in winter because a closed room reminds you of the night your father died. He says you have never once, not one single time, gone to the lake to swim, though you want to, because a king cannot be seen in a lake. Every hair on my body stood up. He says you are lonely, she said, in a way that is starting to become permanent. The hearth cracked. Steam moved along the ceiling. Somewhere above us, a bell rang the 5th hour of the quiet, and 11 counselors bent over their slates and wrote polite fictions to one another, and I stood in my own kitchen with chalk dust on my fingers and my entire soul laid out on a table like a fish. Well, said my wolf, into the ringing silence of my skull, now you have a Luna problem and a Bramble problem. I wrote, he is not permitted to say those things. She read it. Her mouth did something at the corner. She controlled it. Your Grace, she said, I don't think anyone has ever explained to that wolf what he is and isn't permitted to do. I hate her, I thought savagely, and my wolf laughed, and she heard him, and her control failed, and she turned her face away toward the potatoes so that her king would not see her laughing at him. And something opened. I have tried to describe this to exactly one person, and I made a poor job of it. It was not a mark. Nothing burned. There was no light in that kitchen but the hearth and the little gray window at the top of the wall. It was not a pull or a heat or a tide. It was the sound of laughter in a room I had not known my house contained. I have lived in Ashenmere all my life. I know its 90 rooms. I know which stair sings and which door swells in the rain, and standing there in the steam I felt, distinctly and impossibly, a door come open somewhere deep in the structure of me. Into a room I had walked past for 29 years without ever noticing the door, and in that room somebody was laughing. I put my hand flat on the table. She stopped laughing at once. Are you unwell? No, I wrote, because I did not have a chalk large enough for the truth. You've gone the color of the wall. I am the king, I wrote. I am always this color. She read it, and she laughed again, and the room in me got warmer, and my wolf, my chattering, undignified, disgraceful wolf, who has never once in 9 years been quiet when I needed him to be quiet, said nothing at all. That was how I knew. Bramble is silent for one thing only. He goes quiet the way a wolf goes quiet when the thing it has been waiting for, since it was whelped, has finally walked into the clearing. I left. I did not dismiss her. I did not sign. I turned around and walked out of my own kitchen like a man leaving a burning building, and the unheard fell in behind me, and one of them, Sarah, who has been my shadow since I was 15, signed at my back, danger. I signed no. Sarah signed, you are running. I signed, I am walking briskly, which is the sort of thing a man signs when he is running. That night I sat in the small room off the armory, where the mirror is, and I did not practice anything. You chose her, I said. Yes, said Bramble. 9 years ago. She was crying in the hearthroom, he said. The granary had burned and her mother was in it, and nobody had come to her because she was a kitchen girl and there was a great deal of grain to account for. And I could hear her, not with your ears, the way I hear you, a pause. I did not know I could speak to anyone but you. I said, don't. And she said, don't what? And I said, don't stop breathing like that, it frightens me. And she laughed, and it was a terrible laugh, and then it was a better one. I sat with that. She thought, said my wolf, that every wolf does this. She thought this was simply what it was like, having wolves in the house. She has been polite about it for 9 years. Bramble. Yes. Have you told her things about me every day for 9 years? Yes. Have you asked her permission? The wolf considered this honestly, which I have always loved in him and hated in that moment. No, he said, but she asked me questions. What questions? She asked if you were eating, said Bramble. In the bad winter, when Howrick was pressing you and you had stopped. She asked every day for 2 months. And then the honey cakes appeared in the north corridor on the sideboard every evening, and you ate them because you thought cook had made too many. I did not move. The draft stool, I said. She moved it. The shutters in the sick room when I had the wasting fever. She came at night, said my wolf, and opened them, and shut them before the physicians came in the morning, because you cannot sleep in a shut room, and they would not listen. I never saw her. She is very quiet, Bramble said. You are surrounded by people sworn to soundlessness, and none of them are as quiet as that woman with a jug. I looked into the mirror where I had practiced my judgments, and I did not recognize the man in it, because the man in it looked young, and I had not been young for 6 years. 9 years of a hand I never saw moving through my house, keeping me warm, and I had bowed to lords who had never done 1 hour of it. Bramble. Well, you are a disgrace, and you did the only good thing anyone in this castle has ever done for me, and I do not know which of those to say first. Say the second one, said my wolf, and then feed me. In the morning Howrick put a portrait in front of me again, and beside it on his tidy slate, 6 days to the 11th bell. The law is not a joke, and I will not pretend it was. Ashenmere's crown passes through the Luna. It is written in the quiet right, in the same hand that wrote the silence. A king who reaches 30 without a Luna named before the pack at the 11th bell forfeits the nomming, and the council names for him, and the pack must accept it, because a pack that cannot see its Luna will pull itself apart within a generation. My father named my mother at 22. My grandfather at 25. I would be 30 in the autumn, 6 days. Howrick wrote, Westwater, 400 spears, she is said to be gentle. Councillor Ostrith wrote, Lady Sorrel offers her cousin, younger, 200 spears and the salt road. My sister at the far end wrote nothing, and looked at me with a great deal of sympathy and absolutely no help. Sorrel is not my sister. Sorrel is the lady of the Eastern Hold, and she has wanted her cousin in my hall since I was 24, and she is not a villain either. She simply believes that a kingdom is a machine, and that I am a bolt in it that has not yet been tightened. I picked up the chalk, 11 pairs of eyes. In the quiet, Bramble observed, "You cannot argue." That is the cruelty of it, and I had never felt it before that spring. In the long quiet a king may write, and a written word is a stone. You cannot lean on it, you cannot warm it, you cannot make it plead. Everything that makes a man persuasive lives in the voice, and for 11 days each spring, in the hall where the pack's greatest decisions are made, the King of Ashenmere has no voice at all. 211 years ago, that was designed as a protection. It has since become a very fine cage. I wrote, "I will name my Luna at the 11th bell." Halrick's chalk paused, then which? I wrote mine. And Bramble, unhelpfully, began to sing. Do not imagine I went straight to her and knelt. I am not that sort of man, and it was not that sort of week. What I did was this. I began, for the first time in my life, to walk through my own house with my eyes open. I found that the woman in the gray apron carried water to the council at the 4th hour, because the water boy had been struck by Ostrith once, in a temper, 3 years ago, and she had quietly taken that errand and never given it back. I found that the burn on her hand was from the granary. I found that she had a room the size of a horse stall and a shelf with 4 objects on it, and one of the 4 objects was a chipped clay wolf that she had made herself, badly, the year the burnt granary took her mother, and I stood in the doorway of that room like a thief and looked at that small, ugly wolf, and I understood that I had been living for 9 years inside somebody's affection without paying a penny of rent on it. I found her on the 5th day in the hearth room where nobody goes, sitting on the step with her boots off. I could not speak, so I sat down on the step too, which took the entire court by surprise, since the entire court was 2 of the unheard, who signed danger, and got no and withdrew to the corners to have, I suspect, a very long silent conversation about me. She looked at my boots, she looked at hers, she put hers back on. "He's told you," she said, "about the granary." I wrote yes. I thought he would. She rubbed her thumb over the scar. "I want to say something, and I'd like not to be beheaded for it." I wrote, "I have never beheaded anyone." "I know," she said. "He told me. He said it keeps you up." I looked at the fire. "Your Grace," said Yonaquil, "I never once asked him for a single thing about you. Not one. He simply says things. He is the most talkative creature I have ever met, wolf or man or magpie, and I have spent 9 years telling him that a king's business is not a kitchen's business, and he answers me by telling me what you had for supper." She turned her head. "But I did ask if you were eating. In the bad winter, I did ask that. And I'll not apologize for it. And if that's a hanging matter, then hang me, because I'd ask it again tomorrow." The fire cracked. I wrote very slowly, because my hand had begun to shake after all, and I did not care. "Why?" She looked at that word for a long time. "Because he was frightened," she said, "and nobody in this whole gray house had noticed that the king was starving except an animal who lives inside him and a woman who peels potatoes." Her jaw set. "That's not a kingdom, Your Grace. That's a very fine coffin with bells on it." "She is completely right," said Bramble into my head, in a voice with no laughter in it at all, "and she has been right for 9 years, and you have 6 days." And in the room I had not known my house contained, someone stopped laughing and stood up and came to the door. She came to the door of the room in me, and she did not knock, because she had been living in the corridor outside it for 9 years. I want to set down what the next 4 days were, because I have heard them described since as a courtship, and they were not. A courtship is a thing 2 people do out in the light where their mothers can see them. What happened between the 5th day of the long quiet and the 9th was closer to an excavation. I could not speak, that must be understood. 9 days into the quiet the silences wait. It presses on the roof of the mouth. Men grow strange and dream badly. And I could not have gone to her and said, I have found out what you did, and I do not know how to carry it even if the law had let me, because I did not have the sentence yet. I was assembling it out of chalk and evidence. So I went looking, and Ashenmere gave her up to me in pieces. The saddler told me, in hand sign, in the tack room, thinking he was answering a question about girths, that 11 winters ago someone had begun leaving a folded blanket over the neck of the old gray mare I had ridden as a boy and would not have put down. He did not know who. It had simply appeared every night for the last 3 winters of that horse's life, and stopped the morning after she died. The chapel woman signed that the candle at the north window, the one I light for my father, is never once in 6 years been found burned down to the socket. Someone has always replaced it before it can gutter. She had assumed it was me. It had never once been me. Sarah, who has walked behind me since I was 15, wrote on my slate, "The kitchen maid." And then, because he is the only man alive permitted to be blunt with me in writing, all of us knew, Ilian. We thought you knew. We thought it was arranged. I stood in the north corridor by the sideboard where the honey cakes used to appear, and I put my hand on the cold wood, and I thought, 9 years. 10, said Bramble. The mare was 11 winters back. She started before I ever spoke to her. Then why? Because she saw a boy of 18 crying into a horse's neck, said my wolf, and she was 19, and she had a blanket. The unheard are trained to see everything and record nothing. Sarro saw his king stand in a corridor with his hand on a sideboard for the better part of a quarter hour, and Sarro will go to his grave without mentioning it, and I am putting it here myself so that somebody does. On the 6th day, Howrick began to hunt. He is not a wicked man. I have said that, and I will keep saying it, because the temptation, looking back, is to make him a villain and be comfortable. Howrick Vane served my father for 30 years, and he loves Ashenmere the way a mason loves a wall. He wants it standing. He does not much care what color it is. He had watched me refuse 11 portraits in 2 years, and he had drawn the correct conclusion, which was that something had changed in me, and the entirely incorrect conclusion, which was that it was a woman he could bargain over. He wrote at the 4th hour, "Your Grace looks less grim this week." I wrote, "The bread has improved." He wrote, "Has it?" He watched the water come round. He watched her fill my cup. He watched me not look at her, which was the most damning thing I could possibly have done, because a king looks at everyone. A king who is careful not to look at one person has just told a clever man exactly where to dig. "He is going to find her," said Bramble, and for once his voice had no music in it. "Let him find her. She is a subject of Ashenmere, and she has broken no law." "Ilian," said my wolf, "think about what law she breaks." I did not understand him. I am ashamed of that. I had spent 6 years reciting the quiet rite at the first bell of every spring, and I had never once heard what I was saying. In the 211th spring, and in every spring after, no word shall be spoken in the king's hall from the first bell to the 11th. For a word overheard through a birch wall cost Ashenmere a king, a brother, and a throat. Overheard. I sat up in the dark of the 9th night, with that word in my mouth like a stone. "There it is," said Bramble. The quiet was not built against speech. Nobody builds 2 centuries of law against speech. It was built against listening, against a thing that could stand outside a birch wall and take a king's private words out of the air where he had never spoken them, and carry them to his brother. "Say it," said my wolf tiredly. The old king's brother had a listener. "Yes." And when it was finished, they made a law that no word should be spoken in the king's hall for 11 days each spring. "Because a listener," said Bramble, "can only take what is given. Deny it words for 11 days and it starves. They did not hunt them, Ilian. Your ancestors were not butchers. They simply built a house with no food in it and waited, and the hearth listeners stopped being born because nothing that is not needed keeps being born." I was on my feet. The shutters were open. Below, the birch mist lay on the lake like a hand over a mouth. And the last of them, I said, is peeling potatoes in my kitchen. The last of them, my wolf agreed, has been feeding you honey cakes for 9 years. And if Howrick Vane understands what she is before you do, he will not have her killed because he is not that man. He will have her made a state instrument, sealed to the crown, moved into the tower where the archives are, and asked politely, for the rest of her life, to tell the council what the neighboring holds are thinking. I said something in the dark that a woman of 65 would not want written down, and I will not write it down. Yes, said Bramble, that. I found her in the hollow kitchens at the hour before dawn, because that is when bread is set, and because I had stopped pretending to sleep. She was alone. The hearth was banked. She had her sleeves up and her hands in the dough, and she did not turn round. You've been standing there, she said, for a while. I wrote on my slate and held it out where the firelight could reach it. Do you know what you are? She read it. She went on kneading. Push, fold, turn. I know I'm the only one in this house who's ever heard your wolf sing, she said. I know it isn't ordinary. I stopped thinking it was ordinary about 6 years ago when I mentioned Bramble to Cook and she looked at me like I'd swallowed a bell. Push, fold, turn. I know my grandmother could sit at the far end of the orchard and tell you which of us was crying in the house. She called it hearth listening. She said it ran in women who were good for nothing else. A short breath, almost a laugh. She wasn't a kind woman. It has a history, I wrote. I imagine it does. Jonah. Her hand stopped. It was the first time I had written her name. I had not planned to, the chalk did it. It is why the quiet exists. She stood very still with flour to her elbows and read that sentence twice, and I watched a woman work out, in the space of about 4 heartbeats, that she was the reason an entire kingdom stops speaking every spring. Ah, she said at last faintly. Not you, not your grandmother. One of them 200 years ago in the wrong hands. That's a distinction the council will care about, is it? Howrick will care about it. My chalk snapped. I took the other. He will care about it the way a man cares about a well he has found in a dry country. He will not harm you. He will use you until you are 80, and he will believe he is honoring you, and there will be a chair for you in the archive tower with a cushion on it. She turned round then. There was flour on her chin. Her eyes were completely dry and completely awake, and she looked at me the way you look at a horse that is about to bolt. And what will you do? She said. And I could not answer, because I was standing in the middle of the exact question, and I did not yet have the courage of it. Here is the shape of what I wanted, that morning in that kitchen, with 3 days left on the quiet. I wanted to write Be My Luna on a slate and put it in her floury hands and watch the whole miserable machine of Ashenmere break its teeth on her. I wanted the bond, because it was a bond. I had known it since the laughter. My wolf had gone quiet in the way that wolves go quiet exactly once. I wanted the bond to do the work. That is what the bond is for. It arrives, it declares. It is undeniable. The pack sees it and the pack accepts it. And no one asks the woman anything, because who asks a river whether it wants to run downhill? And the trouble with a fated thing, which nobody tells you, is that it is the single most persuasive argument in the world, and a woman standing inside it cannot hear her own voice over the noise. She had been listening to my private soul for 9 years. She knew when I was frightened. She knew what I ate. She knew the sound I make when the lambing goes wrong. If I stood in her kitchen and told her that destiny had chosen her, she would say yes. Of course she would say yes. She was the sort of woman who moved a draft stool for a stranger and never mentioned it. And she would never, not once for the rest of her life, be certain whether she had said it, or whether the thing in me had said it for her. You are going to do something enormously stupid, said Bramble, with the calm of a wolf who has watched a man think for 9 years and knows the sound of him arriving at a cliff. I wrote on the slate, I will not ask you inside the bond. She frowned. I don't know what that means. Neither do I yet, I wrote, and I left. I went to the archive tower and I read the quiet rite for 3 hours, all of it, including the parts nobody reads, and I found what I was looking for on the 11th page, and I sat down on the cold floor with the book on my knees. A king shall name his Luna before the pack at the 11th bell, with his own voice or by his own hand, and she shall answer before the pack with her own voice, unbidden and uncompelled. And if she does not answer, the naming fails and the council shall name for him. Unbidden and uncompelled. They had written it 211 years ago, and they had meant it as a formality, the way all the cruelest laws are written by kind men in a hurry. But it was there. Whatever else the quiet was, a cage, a coffin with bells on it, a 2-century-long famine engineered against women who could hear. It had at its heart one honest sentence: she shall answer, unbidden and uncompelled. In a hall where no one may speak, where the only voice that could be raised at the 11th bell was hers. Ilian, said Bramble slowly, do you understand what you have just found? I understood exactly what I had found. I had found that on the 11th bell I would stand before 11 counselors and 400 wolves, and I would be permitted to name her by my own hand, and she would be required to answer aloud, in the long quiet, in the king's hall, in the one place on this earth where an audible woman's voice would be a scandal so total that the pack would remember it for 200 years. And she would have to do it in front of them, alone, with everyone she had ever served watching her open her mouth in a room built to keep women like her silent. And I could not warn her, and I could not coach her, and I could not so much as want it at her too loudly, because she would hear my wolf, and if she heard my wolf wanting it, she would give it to me, and it would not be a choice. It would be a kitchen maid handing a king a honey cake in a dark corridor for the 900th time. So, said my wolf. So I did the only decent thing left, and it was the hardest hour of my life, and I have paid for it in every year since with a kind of joy I do not deserve. I went down to the kitchens on the 10th day, and I wrote her 3 sentences, and I gave her the chalk. The first was, at the 11th bell I will name a Luna by my own hand. The law requires her to answer aloud, of her own will, or the naming fails and the council names for me. There is no other way it can be done. The second was, you may not know it, but you have heard me want things for 9 years, and I will not let that do my asking. So I am telling you what I want in writing once, and then I am going to be silent, and I am going to send my wolf away from you until the bell. She read that one twice. Her hand went to her mouth. The third was, if you do not want this, do not come to the hall. No one will ever know it was you. You will keep your kitchen and your shelf and your clay wolf, and I will take the council's lady, and I will be perfectly civil to her for 40 years, and I will never once ask you why. That is not a threat, and it is not a grief laid at your door. It is simply the true shape of the choice, and you have never in your life been given the true shape of anything. She stood in the steam with the slate in her flowery hands. Send him away, she repeated. Bramble. Yes, I wrote. For 3 days he's the only friend I've. She stopped. She put the slate down on the table very carefully, the way you put down something that has begun to be heavy. You'd take him off me, so I can decide. Yes. That's the cruelest kind thing anybody's ever done to me, said Yona Quill. And I could not answer, because I had already begun. Bramble. I heard, said my wolf. He sounded for the first time in 9 years like an old animal. Ilian, she is standing right there. Go quiet. She will think I have died. She has heard me every day since she was 19. Then say goodbye, I wrote on the slate, and turned it round so she could read it, and say it where I cannot hear what you say. And I walked out of the hollow kitchens and up the stair and out into the birch mist, and I stood on the shore of the lake in the cold, alone in my own skull for the first time since I was 20 years old. It is a strange, ringing thing, to be a man with a silence in him. Behind me, somewhere under the hill in a warm room full of bread, a wolf was telling a woman something. I do not know what. I have never asked either of them. It is the one door in Ashenmere I have left shut. The mist moved on the water. The 10th bell rang. One day. And then, because I am not so noble as this account has been making me sound, I stood on the shore of that cold lake in my black coat, and I thought, quite clearly, at nobody. If she does not come, I do not think I will be a very good king after this. Nothing answered. That was the point. That was the entire point. And still I stood there another hour, listening to the silence where my wolf had been, learning the size of what I had just handed her. The Hall of Ashenmere holds 411. I have never counted them before. I counted them that morning, standing behind the birch screen with the crown in my hands like a man holding something that had been handed to him at a funeral. 411 wolves of my pack, packed shoulder to shoulder in the cold timber dark, every one of them silent, every one of them breathing. You cannot imagine what 400 people not speaking sounds like. It is not nothing. It is a great slow rush, like being inside a shell. Howrick stood at the council rail with his slate in his tidy hands. Ostrith beside him, the Lady Sorrel of the Eastern hold in green, and behind her a young woman I had never met and never asked to meet, Marin of the Westwater, 24, said to be gentle, who had been dressed since dawn and brought to a hall where she would not be permitted to say a word about her own life. I looked at her, and I felt sick with what my house had nearly done to her, too. It is not too late to be reasonable, Howrick wrote, and held the slate where I could see it. I did not answer him. Behind the screen, in the dark, I was alone in my skull. 2 days of it now. I had not known that a man could be homesick for the inside of his own head. The bellwoman went up the ladder to the rope. And Howrick turned his slate over and wrote, in that same tidy hand, the thing he had been building for 4 days, and held it up so that the council rail could read it, and the front ranks of the pack could read it, and I could read it. Your Grace intends to name the kitchen woman Iona Quill, who is a hearth listener of the old blood, and who has stood outside your councils for 9 years with her ears open. The rush of the hall changed, 400 people not speaking, all at once differently. He had done his digging. He had done it well, and he had done it honestly, and here is the thing I understood in that moment with the crown in my hands. Howrick Vane did not think he was destroying her. He thought he was saving Ashenmere from a repetition of the worst night in its history, and he thought he was offering her the archive tower and a cushion, and he had never in his life considered that she might want anything, because he had never in his life considered that a woman with flower on her wrists had a wanting in her at all. That is not villainy. That is something more ordinary, and it has done more harm. I set the crown down on the sill of the screen. I took my chalk. And I walked out into the hall, into 400 faces, and I did what no king of Ashenmere had done in 211 springs. I did not go to the dais. I went to the rail, and I wrote on Howrick's own slate, and I turned it round so the pack could read it. Yes, she is, and every one of you has eaten bread her hands made while she listened to me be afraid. The rush changed again. I wiped it. I wrote again. My hand had gone entirely steady, which is a thing that happens to me only when the ground has finally given way. The quiet was not made to silence kings. It was made to starve listeners. It has worked. There is one left, and she has never used one word of what she heard against me, and she has used a great many of them to keep me alive. Wipe, Ostrith had gone the color of ash. Sorrel's chin had come up. I will not put her in a tower. I will not put her in a chair with a cushion. I have not brought her here to be an instrument of this council. Wipe and then. Because there is a moment in every man's life where the whole thing hangs on whether he can say the true sentence instead of the impressive one. I have come to ask her to marry me, and I have not been able to ask her because I am forbidden a voice, and because she can hear my heart, and a woman who can hear your heart cannot be asked anything freely. So I have not asked. I have written it down, and she does not have to come." The bell woman had her hands on the rope. Halric took the slate out of my hands. He was shaking, and it was not rage. I knew him too well by then. He wrote, and his tidy letters had gone crooked. "And if she does not come, your grace." I took the chalk back. "Then name the Lady Marin, and I will honor her all her life, and I will never speak of this again." I meant it. It was the worst sentence I have ever written, and I meant it, and I think perhaps that is the only reason any of what came after was permitted to happen. The first bell of the 11th rang. There is a ritual to it. The king stands at the center of the floor beneath the smoke hole, and the nomming is made, and the woman answers before the second stroke, unbidden and uncompelled, and if no answer comes the council names for him, and the pack accepts it, and the spring goes on. I walked to the center of the floor. I turned around once slowly, and looked at 411 people, and none of them were her. The second stroke. I want to tell you that I was serene. I was not. I stood under the smoke hole in the gray spring light and I thought, she is 9 years tired. She is 38 and she has a shelf with 4 things on it. She has a kitchen that is warm and a hearthroom that is hers, and I have offered her a hall of 400 people who will look at her mouth and call her a listener, and I took her only friend away from her to do it, and I called that decency. I have made a very great mistake, I thought, at nobody. I should have simply loved her badly, like an ordinary man, and let her be happy. Third stroke. And nothing answered me. And I understood, standing there, that this was the price of the thing I had done, and that it was correct, and that I would pay it, and that I would be civil to Marin of the Westwater for 40 years. Fourth, fifth. Halric raised his hand for the council's nomming. Sixth stroke. And a door opened at the back of the hall, the low kitchen door, the one nobody uses, the one that comes up under the west wing from the hollow kitchens where the bread is. And it opened the way a door opens when the person pushing it has flour to the elbow and no free hand. The pack turned. She came up the length of my hall with her sleeves rolled and her apron on. She had not changed. I have thought about that 10,000 times, and I have decided she did it on purpose, and I have also decided she simply had bread in the oven and no time, and I have never asked, because both of those women are her. She stopped 10 feet from me. Her face was white and perfectly composed, and she was breathing like someone who has run up a hill. Seventh stroke. I could not speak. She knew I could not. She looked at me, and there was a question in her face, and I could not answer it, and my wolf was 2 days silent and would not answer it either, and there was nobody in that hall who could tell her what to do. Eighth. Nobody had ever asked Iona Quill for anything in her life. They had only ever let her give. Ninth. She looked around at 400 wolves, at Halric, at the lady in the good dress who was watching her with her mouth open, at the smoke hole and the gray light coming down it, and the 211 springs of stacked silence pressing on the roof of that hall like snow on a barn. 10th stroke. And Iona Quill, a kitchen maid of Ashenmere, the last hearth listener of the old blood, 38 years old with flour on her chin, took a breath in the king's hall in the long quiet, where no word may be spoken, and said out loud in a plain, carrying, entirely unimpressive voice, the voice of a woman calling that the bread is ready. "Yes, and you can stop holding your breath, you great fool. I heard you thinking at the lake." The 11th bell rang over the top of it. They tell it now with the pack falling to its knees. It did not. 400 wolves stood absolutely still with their mouths open, and somewhere near the back, a very old woman began to laugh, and it spread, through that packed dark hall, the first sound in 11 days, 400 people laughing helplessly in a room where laughing was against the law, and Halric Vane put his slate down on the rail and pressed both hands over his face and his shoulders shook, and I have never known to this day whether he was weeping. And in the back of my skull, a door slammed open, and a wolf who had held his tongue for 2 days said, in a tone of unbearable satisfaction, 9 years, 9 years, and she says it in front of 400 people with flour on her face. Ilian, I have never been so happy. I did not go to my knees either. I crossed the 10 feet and I stood in front of her and I could not speak, and she looked up at me and rolled her eyes and said, "Well, say something." And the whole hall heard her, and the whole hall heard nothing back, and she remembered, and her hand flew to her mouth. So I took the chalk out of my coat, and I held the little slate against my chest, and I wrote one word on it, and I turned it round. Yona. That is all, her name. It was the first word I ever gave her that was not an explanation, or a warning, or the true shape of a choice. She read it. She took the slate out of my hands, and she looked at it a moment, and then she pressed it flat against my chest with both palms, hard, the way you press flat something that is trying to blow away, and she leaned her forehead on the back of her own hands, and that was our vow, and 400 people watched a kitchen maid hold a king still. We did not stop the quiet. It is still kept in Ashenmere from the first bell to the 11th every spring, but it is kept now the way a family keeps a grave tidy, and not the way a jailer keeps a key. On the 11th page of the right, in a hand less tidy than Halrich's, there is a new sentence, and it says that no law of this kingdom shall be built to starve a child for the way she was born, and beneath it there are 2 names. Halrich Vane served me for another 11 years. He never once spoke to my wife as though she were an instrument, and once, in a bad autumn, I came into the archive tower and found the 2 of them arguing about grain figures with real pleasure, and I went away again without being seen. Marin of the Westwater married a shipwright of her own choosing and writes to us at midwinter. Her letters are very funny. She was not gentle at all. Nobody had ever asked her. And Bramble talks. Of course he talks. He has never once in his life stopped talking, and now there are 2 of us who must live with it, and at supper my wife will suddenly set down her spoon and say, "Tell him I can hear him counting the plums," and I will say, "He knows," and Bramble will say, "I know," and go on counting. She hears him still. She always will. It never once occurred to either of us to be sorry about it. Last summer, in the hot week, I walked down to the lake in the evening with my coat over my arm, and there was nobody on the shore but her, sitting on the shingle with her boots off, exactly as she had sat on the hearthroom step. I stopped, 9 years a king and 6 more, and I stood on the stones like a boy of 20 with the whole gray house behind me and the water in front. She did not look up. "Nobody's watching," said Iona. "I checked. I've been checking for 15 years. She held out her hand for my coat. "Go on." So I gave her my coat, and I went into the cold lake of Ashenmere for the first time in my life, and I heard her laughing at me from the shore. And my wolf, deep in me, in the place where the door had opened, was quiet in the way that wolves are quiet exactly once. And I turned over on my back in the black water, under the birch mist, and let it hold me.